Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Heart, our English language programme here on Angelus TV. I'm Sister Mary, and my guest this afternoon is Helen Jones, who is from the Wirral in the UK. Maybe you haven't heard of the Wirral. It's the part on a map that's like a finger sticking out towards the Irish Sea. So, Helen, welcome. From the Wirral, the way to Bucharest. Thank you for making time for us. And your present position is in pastoral ministry in a boys' school. And before that, you were working for the Diocese of Liverpool and of Shrewsbury.
That's right, yes.
So could you just tell us a little bit, because a woman in pastoral ministry in a boys' school, or working for the church, the Catholic Church, would be out of our experience here in Romania.
Right.
So could you tell us just a little bit about how that came about?
Of course. Well, thanks very much, Mary, for having me, first of all. And I think my journey into the church happened due to the fact that I was very involved in my parish work as a volunteer. So that gave me a great insight into how parishes work. And I was always drawn a little bit to the church. So from that time, I then got a little job in a Catholic primary school, which gave me my first chance to explore a Catholic setting, because I'd never worked in a Catholic setting before, although I am a Catholic from birth. So that really gave me a taste of what a Catholic ethos was like. And then from there, something opened up into the Diocese of Shrewsbury, and I was working there as mission secretary. But it was far more administrative than perhaps I would have liked. I thought it would be a little bit more hands-on. So when a position arose in Liverpool, it was a pilot programme for a pastoral associate. So this was new in Liverpool, in the area. And it was very much hands-on working in parishes. So there were 5 of us who started the pilot programme, and it was a really great experience, actually, an experiment to see how we as lay people would be seen within a parish setting and what differences we could make within that setting. And I think for the women, there were 4 women, I think we did find it maybe slightly harder than perhaps our male colleague. But having said that, we were all able to make a big difference in people's understanding of ministry in the broader sense of the word. And from that, I then worked at head office in the Archdiocese, which perhaps is not where my calling is. And after that, I then ended up in the pastoral department in a boys' school, which is a secular school. So my role there is support and in the pastoral realm. So I'm in fact doing far more ministry within that setting, despite it not being ecclesiastical, not being Catholic, than I perhaps was even when I was on the front line in Liverpool. So it's quite ironic. And there again, we're using the same techniques, but maybe tempering language differently in order to support the students in any way we can.
So almost like the experience in the diocese prepared you for this role in a secular environment, but being able to live out this calling. You use the word calling, it's like a vocation really, to make a difference. And for the women at the beginning, you were saying it was difficult to be accepted. Why do you think that was? Is that because it's so new?
I think having lay people doing things that would normally have been seen to have been done by a priest is difficult. And then seeing that they're a little bit used to deacons doing that, but for then women to be doing that is a very different thing. The women warmed to it very readily, and I had a lot of support from the women parishioners. A lot of them were saying, can't you be a deacon? When can you be a deacon? Can't you stay here? I think some of the men, just a few, found it a little bit difficult when I challenged some of their notions. And I did challenge them. I tried to do it nicely.
Oh, you would, Helen.
Yes. And I think it was good. It was good for them to see someone challenging those ideas and not just sitting with them and going, yes. And I hope that it has strengthened that role of needing a ministry there for women within the Catholic Church.
And I notice you have a badge, Companion in Mission,
Yes.
which, and it's connected with our congregation, the Faithful Companions of Jesus. But I'm struck by the fact that as you were speaking, it almost seems like your vocation is to be a companion wherever you are, be it secular, be it within the church. Could you tell us, though, a little bit about how this title, does it describe you well?
I think it does, actually, because I was always looking for some kind of, I suppose, community to be with. And being formed as a companion in mission has enabled me to be with people who are like-minded. And within that like-mindedness, that gives you confidence. That gives you confidence that what you are actually doing is not something you're doing on your own, but you're actually surrounded by people who believe similar things. So with the Ignatian spirituality, there is God in all things. And that's been so much part of my life without even knowing about Ignatian spirituality. That is how I am, that's who I am. So to have this formalized and to be alongside others who also feel that, and the FCJ sisters, of course, who are wonderful and brought me in on this, that has been that has given me a great sense of belonging. Belonging.
And that's a wonderful word, isn't it? It's a human need that we all yearn to belong. Yes. And I'm a bit interested in your background, because I think you told me that you're born into a family where mother and father, Christians, but of different Christian denominations. Yeah. And could you just share a little with us about your early experience of God?
Yes. Yeah. Well, my mother always tells the story that she was out with me in a playground, and it'd been raining, and there are the benches, and then there's the slats on the benches, and there were little raindrops hanging from those benches, and that I was touching the raindrops, getting the water from them, and making the sign of the cross with them. I was blessing myself. So my mother thought this was lovely. My mother is a Lutheran. So her sense of faith was rather more austere, I should say, than perhaps my relationship to faith is. And that austerity was very much prevalent in the way she viewed faith. My father was the Catholic, but his faith was more that he would go to Mass. He was very private about his own personal experience with God. He would never talk about that, so it was all about the trappings of the church. So that left me kind of in the middle. But obviously with that, if I was already somehow connecting with something that I didn't even know about at that early age, that was something special.
Yes, so dipping your fingers in, seeking the drop of water and the ritual is so important, but there's also something quite beautiful about raindrops. I'm just wondering whether, a small child, when you see children looking up with wonder at things, but using that to bless yourself sounds almost like a piece of poetry. Or
Well, my mother only told me this quite recently, actually, so I was quite taken aback when she did, because she's not a naturally spiritual person. She's very much into people. That's where her spirituality comes, even though she wouldn't call it that. But that's where her connection comes. But she was very taken with that, and always has been, actually, with specifically Catholics. When she was a sister, when she was nursing, she remembers the priests visiting the wards, And she always said the Catholics greeted everybody and were very, very jolly and gentle. So it was that connection with people, which I think has permeated my upbringing and has been passed down to myself and my sister. And that is such a strong thing to be able to give to others as well, isn't it?
A wonderful inheritance, really, just that connection with people. And it must have been quite powerful, because I think you told me that your mother was born in East Germany.
Yes.
And so her own experience of life must have been tremendously powerful, and yet she married your father, a Catholic.
Yes. And addition to that, my mother was friendly with a lot of German Jews.
Ah.
So my first memories of almost adopted family has been this very European outlook. My godmother, or my godfather, is a Czech Jew.
Oh.
And my sister's godmother is a Christian Czech Jew.
Wow.
So that was the type of the conversations that came from those gatherings were quite different to those of my peer group. So we were dipping our toes into very different waters, and the wisdom that came out of those conversations again formed me in a very different way.
So formed from this background of a strong woman, I imagine, who has lived through Nazi Germany, and then communist Germany, being in the East, having connections with Jewish people from different races also, and learning to connect. And has something of that been passed on to you? I'm just thinking now, Helen, because you also have a real feel for different cultures. Even in the 24 hours you've been here, you've been fascinated by and making connections all the time.
Yes.
And very European rather than insular.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the cultural influences on you? Yes.
I think obviously the European influences have always been there throughout my life. And my first memories were actually travelling to East Germany. So the going through the wall and going into a communist state gave me a really deep understanding of what it looked like, what it felt, what it smelt like. So I think that gave me an appreciation and understanding of how people did live. So you saw a different way of life. So I was quite comfortable in a European setting. But then I wanted to break out of that setting, which took me to Japan. So that's then when, after university, I studied German. And so with that linguistic background, I then went to Japan. And I stayed there for 3 years. And that was a totally different experience to anything that I had even imagined. Because when you walk into that culture, I didn't speak very much Japanese at all, maybe hello and my name is, but apart from that, you can't read, you can't understand. And we were talking earlier about having common hooks that you could understand language with, which fascinates me with Romanian because there's so many Latin-based words that I can understand. But with Japanese, there was nothing at all. And then going into a mindset where you had no commonalities to start with, and you stuck out, being a Westerner, being large, having a large nose for the Japanese. They thought that was very funny, that we have large noses. Going to an area which was very rural. So I was in the south, quite near Nagasaki. And living a rural lifestyle where you're the only foreigner in the area and you are seen to be the foreigner, again, gives you a sense of otherness. And how you cope with that otherness and how people deal with you being the other. But what I found fascinating was that in my first year, people could see me a mile off. In my second year, I became more invisible.
Oh,
In my third year, people would have to search for me because you'd taken on that cultural assimilation. You'd become somehow Japanese, even though my skin colour is not Japanese, but my mannerisms were, and the way that I then integrated in the culture, then you became invisible. And I was treated as a Japanese woman by the end of my third year, which was quite an experience.
this is fascinating. I've never had a conversation like that before, because it fascinates me that through the language that we then become more and more assimilated with the culture. But I've never heard something as strong as that. I experienced it slightly here myself in Romania. That at the beginning, everybody seemed to know that I was foreign, not by speaking, just on the tram. But now, people don't assume that. They sometimes ask me for directions. And it must be a similar kind of pattern.
Yes.
But the difference from Japan to insular Britain,
Yes.
even though you have the European influence
Yes.
of German and so on. But that is really quite amazing to think
Yes.
that you can actually feel a gradual absorption.
Yeah. Yes, yes. And I think that's a lovely word, actually, the absorption, because you do, by speaking the language, and Japanese is a great fun language to speak, actually. No genders, no plurals, very simple past form, very simple future form. So the actual spoken language also allows you to become Japanese, because you don't need to explain yourself very much. It's through nuance. It's through not facial gestures, because again, the Japanese are very careful in what facial gestures they use. By averting your eyes, you do a lot of eye aversion. For instance, now this would be seen to be very disrespectful. Because I should not be looking at you. I should not be meeting your gaze. That's very disrespectful as a Japanese person.
And from my part too, would we both be looking in different directions?
You could look at me.
Okay.
You could look at me, but I would be deferential to you. So my deference would be by not looking at you and by inclining my head perhaps a little bit more than normal.
Wow.
So those kind of mannerisms then are reflected in the language you're using, and you have different types of language, as a lot of places do. You have a formal language, but the Japanese formal language is quite different. And you have another language again if you're speaking to royalty, which is completely different again. So that is, luckily I didn't have to use that.
I suppose we also have our language for using with royalty, because I don't think it would be respectful to touch the arm of the king, for instance, and we used to hear about stepping backwards, but
that's correct. Yes,
but you almost have to learn these things.
Yeah.
Well, this is fascinating. I could stay here for another hour, I think. But I also think our viewers would really like to hear about your personal life, because you are a woman, a strong woman, a woman who has chosen to give her life to serving others in a pastoral way. A single mum, a woman, our founders would say, of courage and confidence. And you've imbibed, I think, also some of the qualities that our foundress was looking for in people who would follow her. But more than anything, I think it would be lovely just to hear where you got this strength from. Can you just talk us through a little?
Yes.
Because as this show goes out, it will be Lent, and it just makes it a little bit practical rather than just talking about things we give up for Lent, how we cope with adversity.
Absolutely. Well, I've had, I suppose, in the last 10 years, it's been quite a difficult time in my life. I lost my father when my youngest was just 1 year old. And that was very difficult because I couldn't grieve properly because I was looking after, I had a 1 year old and Dominic was 3. So you have to be there for your children. And I think that grief was delayed. And I think I never really had a chance to come to terms with that. Then when Dominic was 9, he was diagnosed as having type 1 diabetes. And for any parent to have a child who has a life-limiting diagnosis, the shock is profound. And that was a very difficult time for all of us. And that was the beginning, I think, of the marriage breakup as well, where that slowly started to fall apart. So it was a very dark time. And it culminated, I think, in COVID, where you have that time by yourself and you were going down to these depths of darkness. But despite feeling so wretched sometimes at times, I never felt alone. And I always felt as if I was cradled.
Cradled?
Cradled, I was held. And there were 2 people whose work really helped me in that. The first is Joan Chittister, who wrote a lovely book called Between the Dark and the Daylight. And she talks about the importance of the darkness and talks about the healing properties of it. And that allowed me to feel comfortable within that dark time. So it's a bit like bulbs, isn't it, that we see at the moment. They're under the ground and they will come up. But there is a time of quiet, of chill. Chill, where you have to chill. And during that chill time, that's the time to stop. And that could be your wilderness time, as in Lent. And there's also a lovely, Jan Richardson is the other go-to for me. And she's written a beautiful blessing for Lent. And this is also what I felt at those moments of despair, was beloved.
Oh.
And she's written a blessing called Beloved is Where We Begin. And I think that is so powerful to know that we are beloved. And that is what I held on to during those dark times, and I think has seen me through. And I am so grateful for that, because that's a grace. That was not something that I would have been able to do by myself.
Beloved is where we begin. And in our spirituality, we often say that the first week of the exercises, that you really need to feel beloved, loved for who we are, despite our mistakes, despite anything. But we need to feel that beloved to be able to go on in our life. And you're making a point that this is actually your physical experience of that time, of knowing that you were deeply loved. A love that is never withdrawn, can never be withdrawn.
Precisely that. And that's something very special. And I'll never regret those moments of darkness that I had. I see them as gift. And even now, when you do have moments where you are feeling that things aren't quite going your way, I remember those times. And I know that I'm just gently cocooned in that, because that is where I need to be at the time. And I think we all need times there where we just are in that dark space, but not to be afraid of it, to embrace it and to use it as a time for healing.
Not to be afraid of it, but to embrace it and use it, and know that this is a time when we are cradled, held, and healing will come. Thank you, Helen. It's been not just a pleasure to listen to you, but an inspiration.
Thank you.
And I just wish that more people could have that experience of listening to your story, to your vocation, to your willingness to change the world.
Thank you very much, Mary. It's been a pleasure, and I've been very humbled, and thank you very much for the privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, and may the dark times in life teach us about the love of God. And may this Lent be a time of drawing ever closer to our God. Thank you.